Well, you should check the rules.
Suitcases are
15 minutes.
If he can move it, he could. You never know.
We'll have to get it out this
Yeah,
afternoon.
get it. I'm just saying.
Okay.
Genesis.
We're in Genesis 31.
Did you have a good trip out? Yeah.
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 Camping.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm hoping we can get in. The Rainier.
Because the fires?
No, because they do like Multnomah Falls where you have to register for timed entry. And when I went to check it, it said I can't register till the day before.
You're cute.
So I don't know if it's,
Well, that's one of the things, after 7 p.m., you can register for the next day.
and I think that's because they're trying to see how many people are on the docket for the next day before they. It seems hard to believe that it would be so busy on a Wednesday,
Right.
but
Yeah.
Why don't you want to go to Helen? Remind me why you don't want to go to Helen?
they've been there, done that.
Oh, right.
Well, that Helen's is out of the way.
But it exploded. We've been at mountains. We haven't been up exploded mountains.
But it's also out of the, but it's really far out of the way. Because you'd have to go all the way back to I-5 and then south 30 miles and then back east to Helen's. Because we're camping on the reservoir that's on 7, which goes from 12 to Tacoma. And it's basically right outside of Mount Rainier National Park.
Well, see, you said we could go another time because it's so close, but I don't even remember us talking about going there ever.
You can plan a day trip to St. Helens. In fact, before he took the call to Ben, Pastor Bitter apparently used to lead his 8th graders, like that was their senior class trip, or their 8th grade class trip, he would take them up St. Helens, they'd hike.
They hike up the
All the
mountain.
way
Yeah.
up to.
All the way. Rich did that years ago.
Many years.
Many. Yeah.
Pastor Borman ran it.
No, it was just like walking up the stairs for a long time. It wasn't climbing or anything, it was just walking.
And then they, coming down, they use garbage bags.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they
Play safe. where you slide, sit on and put a garbage bag on, and
That was
then use your ice axe to kind of control how fast you get going.
Yeah.
And there was a gal there walking around in the park with people. And here was this a 6-month-old Maine Coon that was already this big, long hair, black, calm, harmless, just as calm as could be.
Walking around.
Yes.
When, the moment we put our cats on a leash, they flop.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, the worst thing you've ever done. Ugh.
We never got to them, we just got to the harbor.
That's what Amy's cat did. His uncle used to take his cat walking around,
Around the
did it all
block.
the time, rocking around the wall. So she tried it with hers and did the same thing, flopped and wouldn't get up.
They have their own mind.
I told Sheila, this is not going to work. She said, oh, yes, it will.
Sure will.
Upside down.
Well, and Rocky liked to be messed with besides.
Oh, yeah, she was very amenable.
Very accommodating.
It took us 5 years before she would sit on our lap. For a while, she would kind of sit close, and then she'd
Our
sit
cat's
closer.
delivering mice.
But she would just
Dead
That's nice of her.
Huh?
Yeah.
That's nice.
Oh,
Well, it
we-
was
Two.
already 2 this morning. Some days it's up to
but we
4.
outlast-
You look hungry.
Yeah.
Says,
Some
I
she
found
eats.
a nest and I'm gonna clear it out.
She,
Found a
well, we got
field.
fields all around us, see, so she just, this is the most she's ever done.
Hey, I brought you a present.
And she likes to announce, yeah.
Their cat is bringing them mice every day.
Yeah.
Every day.
We had 2 already this morning.
Oh, my.
Oh,
Yesterday I was
precious.
out in the morning in my hot tub and all of a sudden, and she usually comes up on the side to get rubbed, and she wasn't around, so I knew she was out hunting, and the next thing I heard is, meow, and I said, oh God, she's got another mouse. She delivered it right there by our door, so.
She drop it right in the hot tub.
No, she hasn't done that yet. Boy, that's gonna be. Have fun of that.
Jungle nest by your office?
No, I haven't.
What next?
Jungle.
Oh, I did.
It's been 2 weeks, so they might have split by
Where have you been monitoring them?
now. Oh, yeah.
So they hatched and,
Yeah.
okay.
I don't know, there was a
I
while
didn't
where
wanna-
there was
so-
a lot of baby bird yelling, and so I
So-
didn't know where it was all coming from.
Yeah.
When Jim delivered that topsoil,
Yeah.
I was gonna cover it with the tarp that's
Yeah.
there. And I went to move the tarp and the junco flew out and I saw the little nest there and I tried to put the tarp back the way I found it.
Yeah.
And then I didn't want to go mess with it again because I didn't want her to.
Yeah. I just walked by it. If you go up to it, there's too many eyes. Blue jays, crows. Why did he go over there and do all that? And 24 hours later it's gone. But if you just walk by it and don't really stop.
And our swallow nest is now empty. I
That's
should-
why we
which one?
didn't dive up.
The one on
Okay.
on our tree.
How's the one by the shed?
I haven't looked.
Yeah.
That's the bluebird nest.
There we go.
Yeah.
I haven't really been watching them either. I've been doing all of the things, but
They watch you.
probably. But I haven't seen them at our bird bath.
See, I think they're probably out too.
So I haven't been putting food out, so they said, well, fine, if you're not going to feed us, we'll move on to greener pastures. Any questions, concerns, comments, things that are weighing on our minds that need to be discussed before we jump into our regularly scheduled study? Lots of notes, okay. So last week, we talked about family harmony, or lack of, as Jacob's 2 wives and their maidservants all vied for his affections and for their own place within his household. And we really, and then we also spoke of Jacob working for his father-in-law and how they divided the wages so that in trying to find an equitable way, and yet it seemed no matter what they did, Jacob always came out the better on the deal. Any questions on last week's little Bible history lesson? Because that's where chapter 31 picks right back up. And once again, this is a long narrative, so I am going to read basically all of chapter 31 in one go. Because there's not really lots of places to break, and then we'll go back and we'll read it. And I'm kind of hoping we can even get into chapter 32, because there's some more things of interest in chapter 32. Jacob heard Laban's sons were saying, "Jacob has taken everything from our father. He has acquired all his wealth from things that belonged to our father." From the look in Laban's face, Jacob realized that his attitude towards him was not what it had been before. The Lord said to Jacob, "Return to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you." Jacob sent for Rachel and Leah and told them to come to the field where his flock was. He said to them, "I see the look on your father's face. It is not favorable to me as it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength. Your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times, but God did not allow him to hurt me. If he said, 'The speckled animals will be your wages,' then all the flock gave birth to speckled young. If he said, 'The streaked animals will be your wages,' then all the flock gave birth to streaked young. In this way, God has taken away your father's livestock and given them to me. Once, during mating season, in a dream, I watched and saw male goats that were streaked, speckled, and spotted mating with the flock. The angel of God called to me out of the dream, Jacob, and I answered, 'I am here.' He said, 'Look, all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, and spotted, because I have seen everything that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a memorial stone, and where you made a vow to me. Now get going, get out of this land, and return to the land where you were born.' Rachel and Leah answered him, 'Do we still have any share of the inheritance in our father's house? Isn't he treating us like foreigners? First he sold us. Now he has used up almost all the money he received for us. All the riches that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now do whatever God has told you.' Then Jacob got ready to go. He placed his sons and his wives on camels. He took with him all his livestock and all his possessions which he had accumulated, including all the livestock that he had acquired in Paddan Aram. And he sent them out to go to Isaac his father in the land of Canaan. Now, when Laban had gone off to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he was running away, so he fled with all that he had. He set out, crossed over the Euphrates River, and headed toward the hill country of Gilead. On the 3rd day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. He took his relatives with him to pursue him for 7 days. He overtook him in the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream during the night and said to him, 'Be careful that you do not say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.' Laban caught up with Jacob. Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban, along with his relatives, also set up country in the hill country of Gilead. Laban said to Jacob, 'What have you done? Why have you deceived me, carrying away my daughters like prisoners of war? Why did you flee secretly and steal from me? Why didn't you tell me, so that I could have sent you away with a celebration with songs and drums and lyres? Why didn't you allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters? By doing this you have acted foolishly. I have it in my power to hurt you, but the God of your father spoke to me this last night and said, Be careful that you do not say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. But even if you were so eager to leave because of your strong desire to return to your father's house, why have you stolen my gods?' Jacob answered Laban, 'I was afraid, because I thought you might take your daughters away from me by force. But anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of your relatives, identify anything that I have that belongs to you and take it." Jacob did not know Rachel had stolen the household gods. So Laban went into Jacob's tent, into Leah's tent, and into the tent of the 2 female servants, but he did not find the gods. After he had left Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Rachel had taken the household gods and put them into her camel saddle, and she was sitting on them. Laban felt all around in the tent, but he did not find them. Rachel said to her father, "Do not be angry, my lord, because I cannot stand up in your presence, for I am having my period." He searched, but he did not find the gods. Jacob became angry and argued with Laban. Jacob responded to Laban, "What is my crime? What is my sin that set you off in hot pursuit after me? Now that you have rummaged through all of my belongings, what have you found there that came from your house? Set it out here in front of my relatives and your relatives, so they can settle the case between the 2 of us. These last 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried their young. I have not eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring to you those that were torn up by wild animals. I bore the loss myself. You made me pay for all the losses, whether they were stolen by day or stolen by night. I was the one out there, consumed by the scorching heat of the day and the frost by night, and sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I put up with this in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for the share of your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, the God of revered by Isaac, had been with me, you certainly would now have sent me away empty-handed. But God saw the oppression I suffered for the labor of my hands, and he rebuked me last night." Laban answered Jacob, "These daughters are my daughters. These children are my children. These flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do today about these daughters of mine, or about the children to whom they have given birth? Now come, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it stand as a witness between me and you." So Jacob took a stone, set up a memorial stone. Jacob said to his relatives, "Gather stones." They collected stones and piled them up. They ate there beside the pile of stones. Laban called it Jager Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Galeed. Laban said, "This pile of stone is a witness between me and between you this day." So it was named Galeed and Mizpah, for he said, "May the Lord watch between me and you. When we were absent from one another, if you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives in addition to my daughters, even if no one else sees it, understand that God is a witness between me and you." Laban said to Jacob, "See this pile of stones, and see this memorial stone that have been set up between me and you. May this pile be a witness, that the memorial stone be a witness, that I will not cross over beyond this pile to you, and you will not cross over beyond this pile and this memorial stone to harm me. May the God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us." Jacob swore by the God revered by his father Isaac. Jacob offered a sacrifice there on the hill country and invited his relatives to eat bread with him. They ate bread and stayed all night in the hill country. Early in the morning, Laban got up, kissed his sons and daughters, and blessed them. Laban departed and returned to his place. What things stand out to you, or what questions do you have on that long history of Jacob's flight?
Something I hadn't paid attention to before, but in 29, when Laban says, "The God of your father spoke to me," did he really, or was Laban making that up?
Well, we're told in 24, God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream during the night and said to him. So, yes.
Thank you for that.
What, be careful that you don't say anything to him,
Yeah,
either good or bad? So that would focus on what does the either good or bad. I would say, well, so obviously it doesn't mean don't talk to you. God didn't say turn around, go back home. He's saying something else. So what does it mean don't say anything to him, good or bad?
don't say anything that might convince him to stay.
Ah. Don't say anything that might change his mind. So, whether it's, I'm sorry, I've wronged you, come back and work for me and we'll make fair wages and you can establish your house and we'll make a covenant and we'll be the family we should have been all along. Or, how dare you run away with my daughters and my flocks? If you don't come back and serve me, I will take them all by force. That's how I would interpret the do not say anything good or bad, based on the way the story fits into the narrative of Jacob's life, and what God had promised him and what God told Jacob, and also the way that the conversation unfolds after this. Rich.
So Rachel was calling her father to working and
Can we wait on the household gods just a little bit? Because I'm assuming we all need to talk about the household gods. Other big pick, Gene.
Maybe a minor thing, in verse 6, 15, 15, 16, the children that were born to Rachel and Leah as maidservants, would Rachel and Leah have considered them their own?
Yes. At least for the sake of inheritance.
Okay.
So what does it mean when Laban is saying, why did you take away the daughter?
Well,
Not have the same thought that
but they usually don't sneak off in the middle of the night and take your grandchildren 500 miles away where you're never going to see them again.
I just got concept of Laban thinking they're all his.
And, I mean, heredity is a perhaps even bigger deal for them than it is for us. And maybe I'll wait on finishing that answer as we go through the narrative a little bit.
Did Rachel and Leah have brothers?
It appears so.
Where does it?
Yeah, well, that's how chapter 31 starts. Jacob heard that
yeah.
Laban's sons were saying Jacob had stolen.
But that was a good 5 minutes ago. That we
It was a long chapter.
So the daughters probably wouldn't have had an inheritance
Correct.
anyway.
And it's, well, why don't we dive into it then? Are there any other big questions?
I think that God made a point of letting Jacob know that the birth of these sheep and the goats that were going to be Jacob's had it nothing to do with the limbs that he had put in the water or however that God himself had done. It was not a result of superstition.
And so I was trying to be careful last week, because some people will go, this is straight up superstition. They'll read about the mandrakes and they'll read about the limbs in the water, and they'll say, well, these are just crazy superstitions that they're following. And I want to be a little bit more careful. That's why I do wonder if it was some sort of trick to get the animals to go there, and so that he was kind of manipulating the system, but not like, oh, well, if they see streaks in the water, they'll be streaked when they come out. But at the same time, even Jacob says before, when he's talking to his wives, that God's the one who gave me speckled or streaked or whatever they were, that no matter what Laban said, it always came out the way that I would be blessed. And he was saying that this is God's truth. And so, yes, God tells him that too, but Jacob already recognized that all along. What is the conflict between Jacob and Laban? Wealth. And in a way, what's the equitable arrangement between Jacob and his father-in-law? Who's upset the most? I mean, Laban gets upset too, but who's starting to complain and grumble? Okay. Rachel and Leah also, but it starts with Laban's sons. Can you think of a solution that Laban's sons could have had if they were upset over how Jacob was managing their father's flocks? It seems like they could have done the work, right? And for Laban, when he sees that his flocks are not increasing and that whatever the wages are, it's going Jacob's way, instead of changing wages, could not they have figured out how to settle Jacob in with his own flocks and have his own sons? Hi, Shauna. I'm doing well. How are you? I'm having a good day.
Me too.
Good. It seems like there would have been a simple solution. But all along the way, what does Laban keep thinking?
Jacob's going to be here forever.
A little bit of that, and okay, yes,
It's
and
not fair. There's nothing I can do. He's taking my stuff.
towards the end, yes, I think he's thinking, if I just pull the right strings, all the stuff that's going to Jacob will come to me. So all the animals are producing speckled. Well, I'll change his wages to streaked. And then all of those speckled animals will be mine. Oh, they're all coming out streaked? Well, I'll just change it to brown or whatever it is. And then all of that will be mine. And so he can't help but think to himself, if I just work this the right way, I can have my cake and eat it too. I don't have to go out in the fields. I don't have to send my sons to work. I don't have to do these things. I can get Jacob to produce wealth on my behalf. And so he keeps changing the wages because he assumes that eventually he'll hit on the combination that will return the most to him instead of to Jacob. When really there was nothing stopping them from saying, for him from saying, you know, Jacob, you have your own flocks and herds now. We have our flocks and herds. Why don't we go our separate ways? You can manage yours over in this land, and I'll manage mine over in this land, and we'll just keep our flocks separate. But that, they were already keeping them separate, but Jacob was always working Laban's flocks, and Jacob's sons were managing his. Meanwhile, Laban's sons are doing none of the work, it seems, or only doing the work during shearing season, and expecting that all of Jacob's work would turn out for them.
Like, everybody's a manipulator here, manipulating not only their own but their neighbors, and they're both doing this all the time. It's common practice.
And in a way, it is common practice, isn't it? Isn't this just a picture of the way the world kind of always works? That employers want to get the maximum out of their employees for the least amount of cost. And the employees, now, some employers want their employees to be, so it's not necessarily that's how it always is, or that's how it always should be, but that's generally how it is. And employees often want to get the most amount of wages for the least amount of work that they possibly can. And so Jacob and Laban are showing that in a lot of ways they are products of this sinful world just as much as we are. And when we're probably not ever going to get there, because by the time we get to the giving of the law, that would be like 5 years from now, the pace we move. But when you read God's law and what he tells his people, you will do this and you won't do this, you will do this and you won't do this, you do have to read it in terms of God setting a new standard for how people interact with each other, the way that employers interact with their employees, the way employees interact with their employers, because he recognizes this is the way it will work unless something stops it. It's not really until the New Testament where you get Paul telling the Colossians, and in all these things, work as if working for the Lord and not for men. That's Colossians 3:23. And he's saying that not to employees, but even to slaves. Work as if you're working for the Lord, so do your best not only when your master's eye is on you, but when you are left to your own devices. And in some ways that it is very much a uniquely Christian ethic.
Jesus' disciples had to struggle with the same thing. I think Matthew, the tax collector,
Right.
had to change his mind.
Well, Matthew, Zacchaeus, the, you know, Zacchaeus was well within his rights, and Matthew was well within his rights to collect as much taxes as they could squeeze out of the people. Rome said, tax collectors owe us this much. Whatever you collect over that is your own. So, you know, there was a motivation there to be either, if you were truly dishonest, to inflate the amount that people owed in taxes, or if you were just regularly diligent to say, well, if you're a day late, you get the penalty. And guess who gets to receive that penalty? The tax collector. That was his wages. And so you'd almost be cheering for people to be late on their taxes, because then you could charge them the penalty and you didn't have to even feel guilty about it, and that's money in your own pocket. But in theory, the people of Israel weren't supposed to treat each other that way, because God had set up a different law. It is interesting that you also observe from both Jacob and Laban the very human ability to paint themselves in the best light possible, don't you? Now, there's no reason to think that Jacob ever went against his word, that he's not speaking the truth when he says, I never took anything out of your flocks, I always bore the losses that happened under my watch, whatever it is. At the same time, he was always trying to ensure that the best sheep were going into his flock. That the strongest speckled sheep were breeding with all of the ewes, and the strongest ewes were always being bred with he was always trying to make sure that all the strongest sheep would end up being his at the end of the day. Well, if you're trying to manage the flock for the good of your employer, but Jacob was always taking and making sure if he had speckled rams, they would breed with the strongest white ewes in Laban's flock, so they would have, those white ewes would have speckled offspring, but they'd be strong. But he wouldn't breed them with the weak ewes of that flock, because he didn't want the weak ones. He'd let the weak rams breed with the weak ewes, and so he was always manipulating things so that all the best would return to him. And God blessed him for it. And yet at the same time, it's not like he was doing gene therapy or DNA tests or all of these things. He wasn't forcing, he wasn't doing artificial insemination or anything like that to make sure that none of Laban's flock would get stronger. But he's perhaps not being he's not ready to fully admit that I did always try to make sure that I got the best of the deal. And at the same time, he might argue, but I am in a strange land with nothing. What else am I supposed to do? As he says later, you would have let me go home with nothing for 20 years of work. At the same time, what's Laban saying? Yeah, you came and you sucked me dry, and I've given you everything. And so, as long as we're on that, we get an insight into Rachel don't we? And how they felt about their father's arrangements. How did they feel about the deal that Laban struck with Jacob? Yeah. He treats us as he would a random slave in his household. A little bit, but so he also sold both of them by deceiving. And instead of giving a dowry so that they could set up their household, because that was part of the dowry too, you know. Yeah, newlyweds have experienced this as well. Why do we give presents at weddings? Because you know what, if you had to buy all your toasters and appliances and pots and pans and silver and plates, that gets awfully spendy, doesn't it? And so to set up a house, sending a dowry along, was a way to show your daughter that you loved her and to show the husband that she is valuable to him and that they will have a house together. So, but Laban doesn't do that. Instead, he takes, so that they start with literally nothing. And they recognize that all the blessings that God has given Jacob, who's going to reap all that blessing? Their children. And so, why would we want to stay with the father who values us so little when our husband has been blessed by God? Right. And so they wait until Laban is occupied and they take off and they start going towards Canaan. And they cross over the Euphrates River, which is the southern river southern and western river that flows from the mountains of Turkey all the way down to the Persian Gulf. And they cross the Euphrates and they're in the hills that are in between that Fertile Crescent region and where Canaan would be, so the hills of Gilead. And they're quite a distance away, and Laban finds out that they're all gone, and he chases after them, And he catches up. God appears to him in a dream. And now let's talk about the household gods. What is that about, do you think? Okay, so that would be one theory, that Rachel sees that they're valuable all on their own. What else? Okay, maybe she just wants to stick it to her dad. Okay, there's a long history of syncretism. And in some ways it continues to this day. When you hear Christians talk about karma, is that not a form of syncretism? Or it can be. Or if, when you look at the history of the Roman Catholic Church and the way that the worship of Mary and the worship of the saints, now they would say it's a lesser worship than they give to the triune God. I'll try to be fair to our Roman Catholic friends and neighbors, but the worship of Mary kind of starts because a lot of pagans had goddesses, and Christianity doesn't have any goddesses, and so we need someone to nurture us like a mother. And who's going to nurture us like a mother but Mary? And so it's a form of light syncretism. Maybe it's just superstition. Although, the weird part about that is they certainly weren't good luck for Laban for the last 20 years, were they? And yet, there is, when you talk about household gods, I can't help but think about, in so many cultures, they would, in a way, worship their ancestors and ask that the blessing of their predecessors would then also rest on them. The Romans would burn incense to their ancestors. So yes, they had the big gods, Zeus and Hera and Ares and Athena and all those big gods. But those gods are busy, right? But perhaps our own household gods, those are the gods who pay attention to us. And so in a way, the household gods, those are the gods that actually watch over your household. And they're under the direction of Yahweh, the God of Isaac and Jacob and Abraham. But these are the gods that really take care of us. And so that's kind of the way that superstition develops. And she wants to continue on with that tradition or hedge their bets. That's one way to look at this. One thing that every commentary seems to point to, and none of them cite a single source to tell me that they've read some ancient document that points to this. So I don't know. I don't know if it's just wishful thinking, if it's just uncited, or where it comes from, but they all point to that it's very likely that whoever possessed the household gods got to carry on the name, and it interfered with the inheritance passing. So it was like Rachel saying, Jacob is going to receive what should go to her brothers. And that would also perhaps explain why Jacob's so upset. So either they were made of gold and silver and precious jewels, and they were very valuable, or they had some other societal significance that was of value to Laban. Because if it was just statues of his ancestors, it seems like, well, why not just make new ones? What's the difference? And yet we never hear about them again. They're never pulled out again. I wonder if Jacob ever knew. But it's also a demonstration when Jacob reacts that way that he truly didn't know. So it's a testament to Jacob's honesty that he would even, because there's no way he would have put Rachel's life in danger as he did had he known. And conniving just runs in that family as deep as it can go. Like father, like son, like grandson, like granddaughter, they all just kind of do what they can do. What's the point of a memorial stone? Jacob set one up at Bethel, and now we have it again. They call it Witness Mound or Lookout. Well, Laban makes it a border, but it seems like Jacob didn't have that in mind when he calls it Galid, which means witness mount. But Laban wants to call it Mizpah, which means, may the Lord watch between you and I, so that, as if, if you cross over this with ill intent, God's going to come after you. And if I cross over this boundary with ill intent, God's going to come after me. What? Go ahead.
Oh, I just wonder, is there anything like in our society, like a notary stamp or something like that? This is an agreement.
There is part of that, but I wouldn't say the memorial stone is necessarily that. What's the notary of the agreement?
Witness.
Yes, but how do they notarize that they've made a covenant between each other? Did you catch that? What do they do around it? They have a sacrifice and they have a meal. When we talked about the Lord's Supper, we mentioned how God set up a dinner on Sinai and he ate with the elders, so to speak, where they sat at God's table as a witness to the covenant, to ratify the covenant to the Lord. When you have a diplomatic meeting, what do they always do? They eat together. When we gather for the Lord's Supper, part of that is that we are all eating together as one, and that we're eating with the Lord at the Lord's table once again ratify that covenant and explain that that covenant is still valid among us, and show that that validity is there. That eating together is so very important, and something our society could do a little bit more of, I think. Especially since 2020. It's still kind of not necessarily a thing, but when you have family reunions, when you have a potluck at church, when you have a meeting of the churches, the joint Reformation service that they had last fall, all these things, there's a reason why food is involved, because when you sit down to eat with people, it unites you in a way that other things do not. So that's where I would see the notary, that we are going to eat a meal together, and that's a stronger thing than any handshake could be. And then the sacrifice, that's bringing God into this to witness it as well. Why the pile of stones? Okay, to mark the place.
Visible,
It's visible,
semi-permanent.
semi-permanent.
Weren't there altars usually just piles of stone?
Yeah, they would pile up stones to make their altar. But this one's not an altar, it's a pillar. Why do we have a World War II, a Vietnam, a Korean memorial? Why, when you drive down any highway in Oregon, are there historical markers? And usually it's Lewis and Clark were here. Or, here's the Barlow Road, where the settlers would come down from the mountains into the valley.
The next generation.
Because history is who we are. Another thing our society forgets today, our shared history is part of what makes us who we are. And it's important to remember our history, both good and bad. This is not necessarily a good, happy event, but it does have a happy conclusion. And so they set up this permanent pillar to say, this really happened in a real time, in a real place, and we are never going to forget it because it matters to who we are. And in the same way, when we build churches, when we build cemeteries, when we buy artwork for our walls in memory of a person, when we do these things that establish our shared history together, that's something that unites one generation to another. This is part of my history. I am a part of this history. I can be welcomed in here. This is part of who we are. We are not getting to Jacob. So. Any leftover questions?
When Jacob put the pile of stones on his way to Laban, so the different concept?
Same concept. And that one is, God made a promise that I'll come back to this very place. And so I want to be able to find this place. I want to be able to tell Reuben and Judah and Joseph and my wives, this is where I saw God come down and send his angels to me. And look, God kept his promise. But same concept, different place. Other thoughts, comments, questions? Just a name for that region. Yeah. Well, very far north Syria, Turkey, northern Iraq, kind of that corner of the region. I don't know, do you have a map in here? Yeah. So, all right, let us go to the house of